Okay, we're going to get this thing started. If everybody's start coming forward, take your seats. Again, the food will still be there. We got more people coming in. Their drinks over here. Hi, my name's Chris Daneski. I'm with BAE here in Austin, working with Army Futures Command, and I want to hand it off to our host, as we're members of the Center for Defense Innovation. So here, Josh, over to you.
Thanks, Chris. Hey, everybody. My name is Josh Bear. I want to welcome you all. Who's here at Capital Factory for the first time? Awesome. A lot of you. Well, welcome. Capital Factory is the center of gravity for entrepreneurs here in Texas. We have 80,000 square feet in this building where all day and most of the nights there's entrepreneurs and different kinds of innovators smashing together and meeting each other and learning from each other and building things. In particular, over the past couple of years, there's been more and more men and women in uniform here and members of the defense innovation community, and that's been pretty incredible to see. As Chris mentioned, earlier this year, we opened up on the 8th floor our Center for Defense Innovation, which is 20,000 square feet that's dedicated to defense innovators. It's anchored by the Army Futures Command and some other partners, including AFWorks, who you'll see here, and Booz Allen Hamilton's up there, and a number of other partners, and NGA and MD5 and DIU, and I think there's more coming. And that's a really unique space. And the thing that's most unique about it primarily is one, that there are so many different groups together in one place that doesn't really seem to happen in other places, and two, that it's open to the public, that people can go there and collaborate. And that's why we're so excited to be partnered with BAE and have them here as well. And they've just been incredible members of the community. And it actually started with Chris before even the Army was fully here. Everything else, as Chris was already trying to figure out how he could be part of what was happening here. And that was why it was so great to see him join BAE and kind of and through that was part. I'm pretty sure a big part of how they ended up being part of this community too. And they've really leaned into that as well, being part of our Innovation Council and then putting on great events like this that bring other people in and help our whole community learn about defense innovation. So with that, I am really glad to have all of you here, and I want to introduce Greg Zito. Greg has over 30 years of experience in pretty much every part of the aerospace, defense, and security industry, and now he's the director of the Austin Business Center for BAE, and they're helping to put all this together. So Greg, I'm going to hand it off to you. Thanks for coming out tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. It's really great to be here. Pretty exciting. So this is the first event that BAE Systems has sponsored with the Capital Factory. We are a corporate innovation council member, so that brings me to why we're here. We realize that if we're going to flesh out and find more of the best ideas, that we really need to expand our traditional circles of business partners. And so hopefully some of the folks out here are going to have some of those ideas, and potentially we can work together and maybe be a future business partner together. But when you think of BAE Systems, you don't always think about defense innovation at a startup speed, and innovation at startup speed is the theme for today. So we're known more as a large, defense, security, aerospace company. Maybe not always as nimble as you think. We're 100,000 people across the world. We've got 30 locations in the United States. But we also have a really rich heritage right here in Austin, Texas. Back 64 years ago when we were a startup company. Yeah, an old school startup company is what I like to think about it. So back in 1955, 4 University of Texas college professors decided they want to start their own science company. Okay, so they were able to get some funding from a company called for some acoustical technology for downhole oil drilling. From there, spawned a company called Tracor Aerospace. And Tracor Aerospace went on to be very successful. It became Austin's first Fortune 500 company. Now, fast forward 40, 50 years, through mergers and acquisitions, that company is now part of the BAE Systems family, and that's who you're talking to today. So we're very proud to be here for that. We've got 700 professionals that work about 6 miles from here on our campus over at MLK in 183. So those folks are engaged in design, development, and manufacturing of a lot of electronic systems, the types of systems that provide the capability for our men and women in uniform so they can perform their missions as well as return home safely. Okay. Give you a couple examples of what that is. So we provide IR countermeasure systems that are able to ID, threats and protect U.S. helicopters from missile threats. We also provide thermal imaging systems for the soldier that gives them the advantage to see first and act first. And we're doing today, and what we're going to talk about today is we're in the midst of developing a 360-degree situation awareness system that provides the occupants of ground vehicles while they're under armor to see the scene around them, but also this system can detect missile threats, anti-tank guided missiles. Hand off to a Raven system, which is our threat countermeasure system, which defeats those threats before they implode on the vehicle. Okay? So in addition today, we have some folks from our platforms and services businesses. So these are the folks that are building the platforms, right? The Bradley fighting vehicles, right? For the Marines, they're building the amphibious combat vehicle, and I think there's representatives here for the armored multi-purpose vehicle as well. So those folks are here today as well. So going back to this, this theme that we have today about innovation at startup speed. So one of the things that we've done in Austin through the BAE Systems Corporation is we were expanded and we stood up a portion of our, what we call our science and technology group. And we call that group Fast Labs, as the name would indicate, right? These are the folks that can really take, ideas, mature the technology, and again, bring that capability to the men and women, right, in our military uniforms. So without further ado here, I want to introduce to you one of the advanced technology managers for the Fast Labs group, Mr. Bo Duarte. And Bo, I'll just give, Bo's achieved quite a bit, so I'll just talk about a couple of achievements. As I mentioned, he is a technology development manager within Fast Labs teams in Austin. Prior to joining BAE, Bo served 28 years in the U.S. Navy, where he led both in small and large programs. These have included the MQ-25 Stingray, the X-47B Unmanned Combat Air System, and the FA and EA-18 programs. He's helped to shape new technology, both for the Navy and for BAE Systems, as well as drive highly cost-effective sensor technology. So, Bo. All right.
All right, thanks, Greg. It's 6 p.m. for you Air Force types. Army, it's 1,800 hours. Navy, it is 4 bells. And for the Marines, the big hands on the 12 and the little hands on the 6. Got you there, Dave. Very happy to be out here. First of all, a little survey to help us get our bearings. Can I see a show of hands for entrepreneurs, small business out there? All right, big corporates, big business. A couple of folks, government related. All right, handful. And then former active duty military. All right, outstanding. Thanks for your service. So today we are kicking off our BAE Systems Defense Innovation at Startup Speed series. And so we're really trying to help foster the dialogue for all the folks in Austin who are interested in national security and contributing, to a common cause that we all can believe in. And we'd like to give the perspective of a big company that you hear a lot from the Army guys or from some of the other government agencies here. We'll tell you our view, what we think we can do to help, and how I think we all can grow the economy here in Austin and bring things a little further. And so this is the first event. We'll have a couple more this year, late September, and then another in the December time frame. And we will have the opportunity to drag up some startups with the chance to pitch your wares and create some buzz about what you're doing as we can kind of help each other, as I said, move forward in this space. So as Greg said, I am with Fast Labs, and what we're doing today here is we'll talk about startups and how we do research and development in Austin. What I will do is give you a brief overview. I'll bring up Samit Mather, who is an engineer. He'll talk about a particular project and how that interfaces with the community, some of the technical objectives, and then we'll have a panel of folks across industry, academia, the startup world, and we'll talk not only about vehicle sensor systems, thank you there. We'll also talk about how we can move forward and and do good work. So as Brian works through that, I will wait for the first slide. There we go. So this slide, I'll talk about two of the most overused words in Austin. It's innovation and ecosystem. A lot of folks have different definitions for innovation. My favorite one is a process that creates value in the face of uncertainty. So value, something that solves a problem or gives you a profit stream. And uncertainty is something that's new, maybe hasn't been done before, hasn't been done that way, and entails a little bit of risk. And so then ecosystem is just the environment that in which we find ourselves here in Austin or in Texas. And so a lot of folks have taken a look at what are the elements required to succeed, to develop products that deliver value within this environment. A couple of smart guys from MIT came up with this model. And if you look at Silicon Valley, you look at Boston, you look now at Austin, you can kind of see the elements in place. You need a source of good ideas. We've got some world-class universities here, UT Austin just down the road, Texas A&M, Rice, Baylor, SMU, very close. So we've got some good ideas percolating in the vicinity, you know, with those basic research building blocks that folks like entrepreneurs can take. They can think of a new or different usage and pitch their idea for some kind of a product. Now, in order to do that, they need the oxygen to keep breathing and alive, and that's money. That's risk capital. So we've got a growing number of venture capitalists who are here in the area, bankers, folks who are attracted to that level of uncertainty that I mentioned earlier. There's also a growing number of corporate partners here. From the defense world, there are companies like BAE, but you've also got other folks swooping in on Austin as the defense community coalesces. And so you'll see other partners here, Harris, Northrop Grumman, SAIC, they're all coming because all the elements, like I said, are in place. So corporates, they can also innovate, but they can take those ideas from entrepreneurs. They can help mature, develop, scale, and turn it into something that's useful to multiple parties. And finally, you've got the government side. Not only is that a potential customer and source of funding, but it's also the regulatory environment that we need to do what we're doing. And Austin has been a very business-friendly place as it is. So from a defense standpoint, kind of pivoting to the corporate side, I mentioned part of FAST Labs. So FAST is an acronym that stands for some of the unique heritage of BAE Systems with Fairchild Semiconductor, Alphatech out of Boston, Sanders in New Hampshire, and Tracor here in Texas. And the idea, it is also an adjective that talks about the speed at which we want to operate and transition some of these technical developments into our product line. And you can see on the chart some of the areas that we participate in. We're an electronics company, so anything that touches a tank or an airplane or a ship, whether that's the brains, the sensors, the eyes, the ears, the basic materials, or the intelligent processing to figure out what the target is or what the next waypoint is or how to stay out of harm's way, we do at some location across the country. Typical customers from the R&D perspective are your DARPAs, your Office of Naval Research, Army Research Lab, kind of that mid-technology readiness level area that we develop, and then we turn it over to a product line. So as Greg mentioned, we have a small presence here in Austin, but really what we've been working on is innovation velocity. So it's, as you all remember from physics, velocity is a vector. It's not a scalar, so vectors have magnitude and direction. And so our goal here at Fast Labs is to go in the right direction. So we've got a technology portfolio team that's looking for the right priorities and kind of directing the scope of our scouting activities that are looking for small companies, universities, folks doing neat things either specifically for defense or maybe dual-use technologies for the commercial world that they haven't thought of that would be great for defense. And we kind of identify those and bring them into the fold. So how do we do it? Now, the old school way of R&D And this was kind of in the 50s through the 90s, largely hardware-based development. Is the government pays the company to put something together, do research, maybe partner with the university, but the company owns the IP and just kind of goes through the grinder, and at the end it matures the technology, puts it into a product. Unfortunately, especially with advent in software, it takes too long and it costs too much money now, and so a new model is needed. And so the BAE model is to engage within the innovation ecosystem that I showed you before and help. You've got the blue block down there. That's the brand new idea. It's a concept. Maybe it's a model or analysis. And we need to get that to the red block where everybody wants to be. That's the fielded product that's got volume, that's got probably a larger margin, and that's got stability. And that's where we all want to go. Our challenge is to kind of shrink the x-axis, the time axis, and to increase in maturity. We're going from low maturity to high maturity. And so what BAE has done is we've got partnerships with folks like the Capital Factory, other accelerators, both here in Austin and the Boston area, and universities as well. And so we're looking for those bright ideas. We at Fast Labs, we kind of live in the next two blocks, TRL 3 through 6. There's a lot of government-funded activities, such as small business innovation research, which we can help with, broad agency announcements, other transactional authorities. We'll talk a few of the mechanisms, but that's basically government money to help us develop the technologies. Sometimes that requires partnerships on our part with small companies. We'll talk about that as well, but that's the opportunity that we see within Austin, and the reason that we're here talking to groups like this to find a worthy partner to help solve those needs of our customers and meet the requirements for the contract. BAE Systems is not a VC. We don't have a venture arm, so we're not interested in equity and in buying into a piece of a company. Rather, we are interested in you owning your IP and jointly developing that product line with what makes sense. And that if that involves licensing, that's fine. If that involves a purchase order of a mature technology or a joint proposal where we each kind of own our own IP as we develop it, that's fine. What we're trying to do is span that valley of death to get beyond the incremental funding to that more solid product line towards the top of the screen there. And so what do we offer? We've got deep technical expertise with our scientists. We've got market knowledge and the resources to pull together. And so what I'd like to do now is bring up one of our example projects. And Samit Mathur is our technology development manager who has been running this product line and area for a few years now. He's been with the company for about 17 years. He's an Aggie, good old boy, who has been pursuing active protective systems technology development. So that's radars and sensors and something called soft kill, which sounds very gentle, but it really isn't. And he'll tell you about that, as well as some naval technologies. So without any further ado, Samit.
Thank you, Bo. All right, good evening, everybody. The purpose of this presentation is to discuss some experiences supporting the Army in developing active protection system technologies, and also working with non-traditional defense companies, such as many of you in this audience today, through the usage of an other transaction authority contract vehicle. It's what they call OTA contracts. And the top two takeaways I want you to get out of this presentation, number one is that there continues to be opportunities to support the Army in developing technologies, and we'll talk about that. But the second is that this reemergence of this OTA contract vehicle, I think, is very aligned with what we're having here today, this Austin defense ecosystem with Army Future Labs here and small companies and large organizations like BAE Systems. The presentation I have is divided into three sections. The first thing we'll do is we'll talk about APS, Active Protection System technologies, and then we'll talk about the DoD acquisition process and what Bo referred to as the Valley of Death. It is a real valley, unfortunately. And then lastly, we'll talk about these OTA contract vehicles. So with that said, okay. Ground vehicles, in the absence of APS technologies, are vulnerable to threats. And in particular, there's a threat called anti-tank guided munitions, ATGM. And they've been around since the Gulf War, even prior to that, maybe the 1970s, 1980s. And they're guided by either optics, RF wireless, or wired, and they have lethal impact. When it comes to developing the solution space, you've got two things to think about. You've got situational awareness and you've got survivability. Situational awareness is providing actionable real-time information of potential threats using a variety of sensing modalities like a camera or a radar. And the survivability aspect is really generating an automated kill chain process that defeats the threats. When it comes to APS, you've got two general categories. You've got the hard kill and the soft kill. Well, the soft kill is using optics like a laser to either decoy or defeat the threat. And then you've got hard kill, which is a kinetic solution. And when it comes to developing these solutions, you've always got to be concerned about SWaP-C, size, weight, power, and cost. Now, for us personally here in Austin, we participate in developing these technologies. As Greg and Bo mentioned, Raven is a soft kill countermeasure, gimbaled laser threat defeat. And we've had personal experiences using these OTA contract vehicles. In fact, a year or two ago, we executed a subcontract with a non-traditional defense company here, and we're days away from accepting another contract that's an OTA, and our intent is to also execute another subcontract with an NDC here. The other two technologies that we support are the camera and the radar, and all of those technologies have their challenges, but there's really one common theme that you have when you're developing these technologies. It's helping the warfighter see farther, faster, and with greater acuity. And those are the pinnacles that you need when it really comes to maximizing situational awareness and survivability. So now I'm going to talk about something a little bit more depressing. It's the Valley of Death that some of us have had exposure to. And the DoD acquisition process is the organization of these different activities like the design, the development, the engineering, the deployment, the testing, and the sustainment. And on the left of the Valley of Death, you've got the science and technology activities. And on the right, you've got the manufacturing and development and production. And the Valley of Death occurs when you've got this really mature prototype and you're ready to transition it to an acquisition office. And things fall through. There's a short timeline at which you want to get this done. And there's a variety of reasons as to why the Valley of Death exists. You've got requirements changes, priorities, funding, technical risk, staffing changes. So it's a challenging process, and BAE Systems supports the entire acquisition timeline. On the left, as Bo and Greg mentioned, there's FAST labs that we primarily support on the left side. On the right side, we have lines of businesses, and even internally, we're collaborating with the businesses and we're executing transaction agreements, kind of a lot parallel to what you see in the DoD. For example, with these active protection system components, on the platform sector, they've got the Bradley vehicle. And the Army relies on these primes to help out with integration and transition. So for example, with these APS technologies, we'd work with the platform sector to make sure that the integration is successful. So that, enough about the Valley of Death piece. Let's talk about these OTAs. The best way to describe an OTA contract is it's not a traditional federal acquisition regulation contract. It's not your traditional FAR contract vehicle that's got hundreds of clauses. OTAs, to my knowledge, originated in the 1950s, and I think they first started getting used by NASA to do small projects. And then I think in 1989 or 1990, DARPA started using them. And for about 10 years, things were going great. And then the Army decided to use an OTA for future combat systems. And for those of you familiar with FCS, it had its issues with costs and schedules. And we even went to Congress. And OTA, I think through good or bad news, developed a bad reputation. But then the past couple years, there's been this reemergence of the OTA. And in particular, that code on the right, that 2371B, that enables the customer to transition the contract vehicle that's currently a prototype to follow-on production, non-compete. So you think about the Valley of Death that we just talked about, and you think about how time doesn't help. Well, this is one of those mechanisms that can bridge that valley of death. How it works is you have a customer base, and you have these consortiums that have these OTAs. And there theoretically should be a one-to-one mapping between these tech topics that the customer base has and these consortiums. So for example, with the work that I support with APS, there's NAMC and DOTC. And every fiscal year, these OTAs produce tech topics, and there's like probably 13 or 14 of them. And what we do is we get the list, and we go through them, and you're able to communicate with the customer. And if there's a good fit, you and a non-traditional defense company put together a 5-page white paper and a ROM, a rough order of magnitude. It's a low level of effort to do. And 60 days later, you get feedback on how things looked, and many times you're asked to submit a proposal, and that gets put in the basket for a couple years, and if you're selected, there's a lot of flexibility in these OTAs. They could change the SAU, they could adjust the funding, things that you typically wouldn't see with other vehicles. So in conclusion, when I take a look at this consortium going on right now and the collaboration, I think it makes a lot of sense that when these tech topics come out, we work as one team to really try and address some of these tech topics. So with that said, I'll hand it over.
All right, thanks, Amit. And so before we turn over to the panel, any questions about OTAs or acquisition stuff before we get the next group up here?
We actually, about a year or two ago, we executed an OTA with an NDC for Raven and put on an internal demonstration. The next OTA, called the layer demonstration, we're also going to be working with an NDC. So it's in the critical path.
Yeah, so we, as part of my tech scouting role for Austin, OTA is the prime either has to spend 1/3 of the cost themselves or find a partner, non-traditional or nonprofit, who has a significant part of the effort. We prefer the latter, and so there's a rich opportunity for a lot of folks in this room. If you've got something going that either we don't or we could use, then that's that partner opportunity, and we do have some local examples, so it's real. Are OTAs open to non-U.S. companies? It depends on the language of the OTA. If it's classified, probably not, but other opportunities might be open as well, so it's really, it really kind of depends on the fine print. Okay, let's have the panelists come on up here then, and I will introduce them and then turn it over, and we have their assignments of seating. We'll see how good they are. You're down here, Adam. Very good. Excellent. Come on up here, John, and all right. You, John, I think are right here. And the reason I say this, just so we'll have reference, actually I don't even have the slide in this version, but what we'll do is I'll start off with Kevin Landtroop is going to be our moderator. And Kevin's been an entrepreneur, former Army guy, law school graduate who's been in the Austin area for the last couple of years, was a co-founder of the Texas Defense Innovation Forum, so you've probably seen him at other events. He's also a partner with Gray Line Defense, and recently has been named for Capital Factory, their defense venture partner. So he has graciously volunteered to start us off here, and I'll introduce the paneling here before I turn it over to Kevin. We've got over here Scott Hatch is with BAE Systems here in Austin. He is our product line director for soldier and vehicle electronics. He's been with the company for about 25 years, wide range of experience for various commercial and military products. He's worked in the Army on ground combat vehicle, on the Paladin self-propelled howitzer, as well as some elements of the future combat systems, the good elements, all right. And he's got a lot of expertise with flight and engine controls, power propulsion systems, and various electronics. John Vlasic, sitting next to Scott, is a professor at Texas A&M University for aerospace engineering, and he is also the director of their vehicle systems and control laboratory. And so he's got over 33 years of research into manned and unmanned vehicles and sensor integration, both in industry and the academic world. He was the founding director of the Multi-Engineering Department Center for Autonomous Vehicles and Sensor Systems. He's done a lot of work with DoD and some pretty cool customers, including the Army, looking at advanced processing and artificial intelligence. And he's worked also in the underwater, ground, and space worlds. So nice to have you here, John. Over here, Andy Boston is a consultant now with multi-domain consulting, but don't let the goatee throw you. He was in the Army for many years before that. He was part of the Next Generation Combat Vehicle cross-functional team, so very involved with the requirements and development of the Army's future ground systems. He's got a leading role, like I said, in the requirements and strategic priorities for Army R&D and development of new technologies. So thanks for coming here, Andy. And then the voice of the startup and venture capital world is Adam Lippman. And so Adam is a senior executive. He's got decades of experience with startups and directing the operations in biotech, software, and services verticals. And so now he is the managing director of Ecliptic Capital. And so they've got specialization in developing and managing startup operations for companies that are positioned to scale. So just getting ready to take off. So thanks, Adam. And I will turn it over to Kevin. So big hand for Kevin. Thanks.
Thanks, Bo. Let's see. We got one over here, one over here. Thanks. And just want to say thanks to BAE Systems for putting on a fantastic event and drawing this great crowd, and obviously our Capital Factory staff who are working the event. Thank you very much for all the hard work you guys do. Before we get into a couple of questions for the panel members, I also want to just make a comment about the attendance and the audience that we have here tonight. Having been here in Austin working in the defense innovation ecosystem and really trying to, one of the first movers here with Kristen Esky, who's now with BAE, and trying to cultivate this ecosystem, I've gotten to know it pretty well. And we've got a really great range here. We've got reps here from our 8th floor Defense Innovation Cell partners. So I see NGA, Army Applications Lab is here. So we're always stoked whenever, the folks who we hope are going to buy some of this nonsense that we're going to put together show up. We got lots of reps from the majors. Boeing's here. Northrop Grumman's here. BAE Systems is here. We've got like real no BS pre-seed startups like Ratio and IoT.ai. We've got some folks that we'll still call startups, even though they've raised like $300 million, like Spark Cognition. But Spark Cognition, who as a startup and a non-traditional, working with a traditional defense contractor like Boeing on a really interesting project. And those are the kinds of things that we hope to really continue to cultivate here. And again, Bo, I'm really excited about BAE Systems being here and really Fast Labs and your mission. And if what Summit is true, and you guys really want to get some non-traditionals, we'll call them, engaged and do some OT work, then Capital Factory is here to do everything that we can to facilitate that, to cultivate that, to train our startups on how to work with you guys, to hopefully train you guys on how not to kill your startups. And with that, I'll just move on. So I want to start with Andy. Mostly because, I'm an old Army guy, and when I see another old Army guy, I just want to gravitate towards that dude. So tell us about the current state of armored vehicles and ground combat systems. Like, what are the gaps? What are we trying to solve? What are we trying to build? And how long do you think it's going to take? What's your assessment as, kind of as you like to tell yourself that this is your second startup in multi-domain consulting because you were employee number 1 at NGCV.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it. So, so starting back in 2017, in the early days before the CFTs were a thing, myself and an intrepid civilian by the name of John Miller at Fort Benning were members number 1 and 2 of the NGCV CFT. And the gaps in armored warfare and the gaps in combat vehicle development are pretty well documented. So I'm not going to reveal anything here tonight that's not available widely. throughout the system. But it's a matter of firepower, it's a matter of protection, and it's a matter of mobility. It's been that way since World War II. And what does that balance actually look like in terms of cost, deployability, lethality, and survivability, and the ability to integrate networked effects across the joint force going forward to meet our national security strategy objectives, okay? So not revealing anything new here, but the national security strategy has told the Army to be ready in the late 2020s and has given us a focus of peer and near-peer combat. And so all of our modernization priorities need to be geared towards the latter part of the next decade and to a peer or near-peer potential foe or adversary across all spectrums of conflict, competition, pre-competition, conflict, post-competition. And so that's fundamentally the problem. And our current systems are mostly driving around in the late 1970s technology. God bless them. I have gone to war both in the commander's hatch of Bradley and a tank. Thank you, BAE. Thank you, GDLS. Okay, and I'm fans of both. But we think we all acknowledge that they're running out of size, weight, architecture, power, and cooling, and the ability to accept upgrades. And so, what is the next thing? How are we going to establish a way to do two things in the armored community? How are we going to maneuver soldiers to a position of advantage where they can then accomplish their mission, the optionally manned fighting vehicle, and then at some point, the next tank, or whatever it looks like, how are we going to deliver decisive lethality at those places and times of the commander's choosing to retain freedom of action and be able to continue the mission? Think king of the killing zone. So you gotta do two things. You gotta maneuver soldiers, you gotta get them to a place where they can be employed, and then you have to have that thing, whether it's a tank, looks like a robot, something, that is the, no kidding, king of the killing zone that goes out there. It can destroy all of your peers' top tier systems, and it can take a hit and keep on ticking. Those are the two fundamental problems going forward.
So you mentioned a word that I really like to not use, even though I started my military career as an armored vehicle leader, as a tanker. But you use the word tank, and I don't even like to use that word when I talk about future combat, ground combat systems. I like to say, ground anti-armor platform or something like that, just something super vague. So how much presupposition is there within NGCV about what these future systems are going to look like? And just as an example, I had a really interesting conversation with somebody probably a year and a half ago about, an armored personnel carrier, which we've got some folks here from that group, right? There's this presumption that the 9-man infantry squad is preordained by God, that it has to be that size. Is NGCV thinking about problems in that way? Like, we need to build a vehicle for a 9-man infantry squad. Sorry, 9-person infantry squad. It's as of today, or as of a few months ago. Or is there really the idea that we can be completely open about, we're going to look at a problem and look at a bunch of different ways to solve that problem, and then build a system that solves that problem in the best way?
So I'll work backwards from that. So the composition of the infantry squad is the purview of the Chief of Infantry at Fort Benning. Okay, so they are going to decide how many soldiers are going to comprise an infantry squad. The problem set when developing an optionally manned fighting vehicle, which again maneuvers those soldiers to a position of advantage where they can then be employed, is your volume under armor. And so it's going to be a balancing act between the vehicle crew and the guys and gals who get out of the back of the vehicle, and what is that sweet spot for volume under armor? Does that mean that we're going to get the entire 9-person squad into one vehicle? Boston's personal opinion, likely not. Volume under armor just simply will tell you that you can't do that, and your weight and your size and your profile is going to be too big. And so then it just becomes a load planning problem for the infantry platoon leader on how he or she allocates their rifle squads or their sappers or their scouts or their fire supporters to get out of that vehicle and accomplish their mission. I use the term tank only because it provides people with a point of reference, okay? So, point taken, don't get wrapped around the term tank. Get wrapped around the function that the tank performs, which is a means to deliver decisive lethality. So it's that thing, whether it be a hovercraft, a robot, a Ford F-150 with a laser on it, whatever it is, disposable or not, manned or not, that can go into the killing zone and defeat all of our adversaries' Tier 1 systems to give the Combined Arms Commander the ability to retain the momentum and in some cases regain freedom of action.
Awesome. So what I'm taking from that is, yes, we're open. The Ground Vehicle Systems Center and NGCV are open to different types of solutions. So I'll move over to Scott. So we heard Samit talk about, you know, some of the programs that you guys are working on. We heard Bo kind of intro some of the history of what BAE Systems is doing. I didn't hear a whole lot about sensors, at least not enough that tells me, like, so when you say sensors, what do you mean? What are these things doing? What are they communicating with? What kind of data are they delivering? How do they integrate? Can you give us an overview of what that would be?
That's a great question, and I'm probably not the guy that's going to answer all of the sensor questions. My background, I've been here in Austin for a couple of years, and so the sensors that I've been accustomed to, or that I've seen, is our night vision systems. I think talked about some of the radar sensors. If I look at electronic warfare, we have electronic systems that are detecting at the aircraft level a wide range of threats. I'm going to look to my friends that know the sensors better than I do for help if I haven't covered. Good enough. And part of the challenge is not just the sensors and development of the sensors and making them smaller. It's then what do you do with that information, and how do you turn that into data that our warfighters, our soldiers can act on once that information comes in, whether that's an automated response, automated target recognition, or a manual response where we're giving them the who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, red force, blue force tracking, augmented reality type of information.
Fantastic. So we'll move on to university. So John, A&M has recently entered into a really, really big kind of prototyping, makerspace manufacturing type of partnership with AFC. You're obviously on the research side. So what's interesting to you in the world of sensors that might solve some of those challenges that Andy has described that our next generation combat vehicle systems are going to need to do, and that specifically would kind of help BAE hit the mark on whatever they're building next?
That's a great question, and I look at these as there's 3 gaps that I tend to think about, but I'm looking at those as opportunities rather than just a gap, so something that a big impact can be made on. 3 that come to mind are the following. So number 1, semantic mapping. So if I've got a ground vehicle that's going to be traversing terrain, I definitely do not want to get it bogged in anywhere that it's going to get to go. And whether that's going to be a local commander, whether that's going to be the driver of the vehicle, that's a big issue. And a couple of ways to get around that are to be able to do mapping. You can use heavy physics-based mapping. NGCV does a lot of work on this, to be able to look at soil quality, look at topography, terrain, and seasonal aspects of this. So you have the 4 different seasons that things are going on. But a couple more things that jump into that too are weather are going to be doing that. So weather can change very quickly. And then also previous vehicles. So previous vehicles going through an area, going across a ford, going through soft ground are going to tear it up. So ground that was probably firm a while back, if we put enough tracked vehicles through that, that's now going to get soft and I cannot go through that. So while the modeling can be done, the trick will be able to update that very quickly and provide that information to the operator. Now, information to the operator, then the semantic mapping comes in to say, I've got sensor output, but I want to put it into a graphical form that the user can make direct sense of. So the driver of that vehicle doesn't have to look at, say, LiDAR imagery or thermal IR or something. I want it graphical, which is can say, go here, don't go there, shaded areas to avoid, green arrows to, many different ways to do this, but that's the semantic mapping, is to translate the sensor language into one that a human could understand quickly, unambiguously, and can take good action on, and can be updated very, very quickly due to all the conditions I mentioned. So that's one. Cross-calibration of sensors, to be able to use one sensor to calibrate another. It's done in the space world quite a bit right now on orbital platforms and such, but that can also be done, of course, on ground vehicles and air vehicle systems for that. And if you have one sensor that you like very well, that's a good truth sensor, you can then say, okay, that's going to be my truth sensor to do that. And then the other one, to go into this, which is a really neat opportunity, is to do self-calibration. And so that's to have the sensor calibrate itself as it operates. So that's just not curve fitting and saying I'm going to get data out of the lab and say, after so many hours, change my calibration. That's actually measuring the outputs from that and then working on those with algorithms, not just a curve fit or anything, working on those algorithms to self-adapt. So adaptive self-calibration that can occur in almost real time. And there's a lot of good work going on right now in optical sensors that can really take care of things like blur and depth of field and that kind of a thing. And those are three things that can really make a big impact right now.
Okay, so I'm hearing you describe a lot of really interesting capabilities, and I'm thinking back to Scott and what BAE Systems is known for. I mean, we heard mention of a Paladin, and we heard mention of a Bradley fighting vehicle. So tell us about mission systems and other types of systems that BAE Systems is not necessarily known for, but to integrate those types of technologies, and how do these vehicles communicate with each other, and how are you developing those systems?
Just to put some of this in context, the electronic systems part of BAE Systems is a $5 billion a year business. I think we could probably spend a week walking through the details of our systems and the capabilities. 15,000 employees, contracts ranging from 10,000 to $1.7 billion. And it really cuts across a wide breadth of electronic systems, really to help us meet our overall missions. We protect those who protect us, and we innovate for those that move the world. And even as Andy was talking, I heard we tick at least two of those boxes with the electronic systems and the capabilities that we bring together. The portfolio of products. And again, high level, and I've worked in at least half of these electronic and optical warfare systems. We developed you've all seen the movies where you've got the chaff and flare systems, so detecting the incoming threat and taking action against those. Night vision systems, which is part of our product portfolio right here. Flight and engine controls, so Apache helicopters, the control system for that, and even some of the targeting systems. Surveillance and reconnaissance sensors, mobile network communications, and aside from the all-military side, we also have energy management systems in both the military and the commercial side. So the same technologies that go on the Paladin to generate exportable power and to generate power to meet the increasing demands of those systems. We also have hybrid drive systems that are in operation here in Houston as well as in Europe. Over 5,000 buses where we do power management and control. So a wide range of electronic systems that we support. Fundamental under all of those, probably everybody here that's working on some sort of system, perhaps unless you're developing like Candy Crush, maybe we don't have those kinds of applications, but I was talking to a few different folks here, and I find immediate applications in one of these systems where if you're working on something in electronics, there's probably some application where we may have some interest to innovate.
There are at least 6 old armor dudes in this room, and all of them would tell you that if you put Candy Crush in the driver's hole, that driver will be awake whenever it's time for the tank to move, right? And I wouldn't have to climb out of the hatch and kick onto the driver's hatch and say, "Wake up, we gotta go." So maybe there's room for,
Maybe even
some
Candy Crush
apps.
has application.
All right, so one of the things I really, really love about Capital Factory and about working with entrepreneurs is whenever I ask a real entrepreneur, hey, does your technology or does your company do this? They almost always say yes. And so I'm going to ask JD, hey, can you build the sensors that he's talking about? Absolutely. All right, so we've got a company in the room that could potentially deliver one of these capabilities. So tell me how they would work with you and give me some success stories about how BAE Systems has worked with, early stage seed round companies in the past. Or maybe we'll say anywhere from, C to A.
I think from my personal experience, probably the success story is working with universities. If I look at our hybrid drive systems, we took basically those 5,000 buses that I talked about that are driving around are controlled. The motor control for those wasn't developed by BAE Systems. It was developed in concert with academia to basically deliver high performance, high efficiency, and that gave us a competitive edge. And we carried that technology into our products and carried it forward. And like I said, that's something that's in production. I think in terms of how, it's events like this, making the contacts, being patient, being persistent. I think I heard somebody talking about a proposal that we put in 2 years ago, and we just heard that we won it. So some of it is patience, some of it's persistence, working consistently with us, looking for those opportunities to propose, especially with the contract vehicle that Samit talked about. Especially as we've stood up the Fast Labs organization. I think it creates a unique opportunity for us and a unique opportunity for those locally here to look for how do we take your products, how do we take your applications and embed them really to, as Bo said, speed innovation for ourselves, for our products.
Sorry, I can make one point there.
Yeah, I was actually coming to you next.
Okay, well, I just wanted to say one thing with respect to like a 2-year time frame. In the world of seed, pre-seed, early A, that's an eternity, right? They blink in and out of existence much faster than 2 years. And so there's a gap that we have to address there to be able to commercialize those sorts of technologies that are from idea through execution and into commercialization.
Recognized. Yeah, in 2 years is not the norm, but I do think. Well, I think that if we look at where we're at and we look at the changes, at least that we're observing in the Army, I do think that there are opportunities today that didn't exist 2 years ago. I think some of the reasons we're seeing some of these come to fruition now is because of a change in the contract vehicle, as well as a change in our own inside of BAE that's looking to drive that innovation faster. So point taken.
So Adam, just want to start off by saying, big fan of Worley. He's been up on this stage a bunch of times. Yeah. Actually met with him on Friday. He's going to change the world in a lot of different ways. And so very excited about him, and particularly, in the defense space and how they're going to be able to really explode some applications. So love what you guys are doing over there. So let's talk, on the capital side. So as an investor, what I'm hearing right here is B2G or B2B with a big G flavor, right? Yep. And what we talk about, I know our Army Applications Laboratory brothers that are here in the room, and really this kind of whole DoD technology innovation in general, everybody's looking for dual use. Nobody wants, like the DoD doesn't want to fund research. They want to buy products, right. Maybe with a little bit of a tweak, or maybe but existing companies, they don't want to support your company trying to build them a product. So as you're evaluating JD's company and saying, hey, do I want to invest in his company because he's really, really interesting to BAE Systems, as they are going to put sensors on a bunch of different platforms that have huge defense contracts across multiple different organizations. Like, how does that factor in to your assessment of evaluation for that company and whether it's a good investment? What are you looking for?
Yeah, great question. So, you know, it's interesting, right? We think of government as an important customer. However, the buying cycle is long, right? We also realize that our motivation is principally to return capital to our shareholders, right, which are limited partners. And so the way we think about that is we want to build sustainable companies. And so as we're evaluating the companies, we're looking at, do they have multiple applications across sectors? We want them to be able to sell into the private marketplace, and that usually is their first pathway to revenue. And while they're cultivating some of these other deals that might be B2G, and it might be that they're you know, using SIBRs or OTAs to help with some of those applications, because those are certainly useful vehicles, but they don't provide consistent revenue that might keep the company alive. So we really look at, do they have a diverse revenue stream, and that's really important. Do they have multiple applications, both civilian and government, and can they be successful in both?
So that's good. So, you know, I've kind of iterated on this problem in an academic manner with a lot of our government partners. And there's this thought out there that, you know, there's a role for venture capital to play in a scenario where a company has an application that's really useful to a big government customer, or maybe they've graduated from an OTA prototyping phase and they're waiting for that follow-on production contract, which you're pretty sure is going to come, and it's going to be sizable. There's got to be a scaling strategy, obviously, associated with it. But like they need some bridge funding. The valley of death that we were talking about earlier. So, is there a role for venture capital to play, and what would that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a role for venture capital, and the way we do that. I mean, it varies, right? So, like one of our companies, SemPulse, is a sensor package that's going to go start off in special forces, right? And the reason they'll start off in special forces is because they require FDA approval for it to go to big mill, right? And there's a waiver for the special forces, so they can get them. They can get in there pretty quick. They can move from bench test to field test, and then out into the field pretty quickly, and that provides them some initial revenue. Now, some of their other applications might be in endurance sports or things like that. Those don't require FDA approval. So we're looking at like those dual pathways, and they're going to require different SKUs, right? Because ultimately, what the SEALs need is going to be a lot different than what a professional athlete needs. And so what the sensors on board are going to be identical, but the casing might be different. The comms might be different. There's some things like that. Whereas like where I met Bo was with one of our companies that's a drone detection company. Now, drone detection is becoming a bigger and bigger deal. Their first applications are purely in the private space, protecting IP for a large film studio, protecting privacy for executives here in Austin or a guy that's got a super yacht. But it certainly has application in the military too, whether maybe on a forward operating base, right? I mean, protecting from these threats that are emerging. But they have to have those multiple revenue streams. Now, what we did in both of those cases is provide seed stage funding, pull these guys from where they might have had a second job, right? So the SemPulse guy, he was doing a full-time gig, and he was doing this sensor package on the sidelines. And at one point, we met with them over a period of 6 months. We said, what will it take for you to do this full-time? And so we made that initial funding, and the institutional funding was a signal, right, that this is serious, and more capital pooled in. And now he's got it, is basically 50 units in final lab testing before it goes to field. And he's full-time. And that's roughly in a year. That's pretty good acceleration. And so, and in the other case, we provided seed, and we're providing the early A funding for them as well. And in both of those cases, you know, these are devices. Hardware's hard, and so you're gonna have to go through iterations. You're gonna have to change boards. You're gonna have to change sensor packages. All of that stuff takes a lot of capital, so you need patient capital, but you also need founders that execute quickly. So I'm not sure if that totally answered your question.
No, I mean, it's a good overview. I mean, so you mentioned Simpulse. I know Simpulse won a challenge at the AUSA annual convention last October.
Yeah.
Did y'all's relationship with them start before that?
Yeah. We've been talking to Kurt Stump, the founder, for a year and a half. From the point of idea, actually. And that actually happened in his backyard in San Diego, talking to a buddy who was in Special Forces, and said, we really ought to be able to do something about the fact that we can play, you know, games on our cell phones, but we can't get triage in the field back to Central Command quick enough to bring vehicles out and perform rescue. So and Kurt said, I can do that. So that's kind of where it started. But from idea to something that's on the bench testing, you know, took 2.5 years.
Awesome. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll open it up. So I've heard BAE talk about, you know, kind of your early success stories were really university based on the earlier stage, you know, research and bringing concepts that could add capabilities. Obviously, we have A&M research here. And then I want to ask Andy also, and I'll let you lead this one. Like, so when NGCV started, kind of what's the optimal interplay for developing advanced sensor technology, or really any other technology that's going to be an enabler for one of these ground combat systems? What's the optimal interplay between, you know, government outlining sort of, I don't want to use the R word, but requirements, like what are the capability gaps, university who provides a whole bunch of research capability but is not exactly known for producing products, and then, you know, maybe a startup that can take an idea, turn it into a company, produce a product, and then a prime that has to integrate that. So any thoughts on an optimal kind of balance in that square there?
Yeah, so it has evolved since we were our own startup in 2017. My good friend Ross Kaufman, who runs the CFT now in Detroit, has just set up a methodology by which every other month he is setting aside an entire day to talk to anybody who wants to come pitch him on anything they want to come pitch him about.
Does he have any money?
No, he doesn't. He doesn't have any money, but he does know the people at the Army Applications Lab here, and he does. I'm pretty sure on a time-to-time talk to General Murray and the crew here at Futures Command and in the Systems Integration Directorate down the street, and he has a means by which to get them, you know, hooked up with people who can at least begin to help bridge that gap. I know you don't want to use the R word, but I'm going to use it anyway. It's about requirements, and so I have just in this very room right here talked to folks with some, you know, a guy with a Pelican case and a laptop and an IP and a brilliant idea, and he's shown it to me. And I've listened, and I've put my hand on his back and said, darn, I would love to have had that in 2009. But can you draw me a use case where that matters in 2026 against a peer or near peer conflict, a competitor? If you can't, you don't need to be involved with it, truthfully, because it's not going to find its way into one of the Army's modernization priorities. And so it is about the requirement. It is about an identified gap, and it needs to be so novel and unique that it causes someone like, you know, me or Jeff Norman or a warfighter to go, you know what, that might be a new way of doing things. It's disruptive enough that it might actually cause me to think about doing something differently. But it's all about, you have to be able to draw that use case. So if you tell me that 2 + 2 = 5, I'm going to believe you, okay? Invite me to your Nobel party when you get awarded, okay? That's great. But if you can't draw me the use case that goes from your technology to a capability that meets a requirement, a capability that fills a gap, or a capability that is disruptive, and oh, by the way, when overlaid against a peer or near peer competitor in the latter part of this next decade, I've got to in my own heart think you can't build a business case from that, and maybe we should be putting our effort somewhere else.
All right, so I'm gonna turn it to John. And so somebody in the Army Applications Laboratory or at the Ground Vehicle Systems Center and in GCV is making a slide, because that's what Army people do, is we make slides. And the slide says something like, okay, university comes up with a proven technology concept. We spin a small startup company out of our technology transfer office. They fund it. And then they have BAE as a first big customer, you know, and that's obviously a fantasy because that doesn't really happen all that often. So, but from your perspective, like, what does that optimal kind of mix look like?
So from our perspective, the optimal mix would really be from the standpoint of a startup company or another company, to be able to use the laboratories and great facilities that all universities have from that direction. From our direction, going the other way, it'd be great to be able to take some of the technologies that we develop and get them in the hands of warfighters to test them at an early stage. Because right now, if we have a concept and if we go to NGCV or we go to ARL or to any other labs or for any other service for that matter, we can pitch that. It looks like a great idea. Have we tested it in our lab? Yes, we have that result. But to get it in the hands of a test community, to get it tested first cut, to see how it works and that kind of thing, that's a gap that's really hard to cover because it takes so much resources, organization, and money on the other side to set that up, to be able to say, here's my device. Can you test it out? Can I put that in somebody's hands and get some feedback on that to improve it? That's the biggest thing that needs to happen to occur that I think will really transition to a much greater phase. I don't know exactly how that's going to happen to be able to do that, but that closer integration at an earlier stage in the process can really reap big benefits.
Scott?
Well, I'm going to say the optimal is right in between the two of them, as they just described it. From a requirement standpoint, what does BAE bring to the table? It's knowledge of the customer, it's knowledge of the platforms, it's knowledge of the systems, decades of experience on these systems, and to a degree access to some of those, you know, being able to work through relationships, to advance the technologies, get the demonstrations, and I fully agree. At the end of the day, if you can demo it, it's 100 times better than a PowerPoint presentation. So how do we take those at the early stage, get the demo, and then it's taking it, as Samit said, beyond just that demo through the Valley of Death and into production. I think from a BAE Systems standpoint, the fact that we're here today, I said more than 25 years. It's been almost 30 years. In my experience, this is the first time where BAE Systems is actually reaching out in this manner, consistently looking for how do we speed the innovation, how do we not go buy that, you know, that technology, but work with the innovators and try to figure out how to close the gap that we're talking about collectively.
Awesome. So let's turn it over to the audience with any questions. And is our mic cube out there somewhere? Negative on the mic cube. Does anybody have any questions?
Hi, I'm a startup entrepreneur, Dan Turner. Company's called Traxel. I'm currently somewhere in the Valley of Death. My question is related to, it's a two-part question, sort of related to sensors. Is any work being done external to the vehicle for in-place sensors or external sensors of the vehicle? And secondly to that, you kind of mentioned a little bit about the networks that you're building in between vehicles. I'm sort of asking how, if there's any work being done that are tying these external sensors and how they're communicating and passing that data to operators. It's kind of a general question. Thanks.
So the short answer is yes, absolutely. In terms of exactly what we're doing and where that technology lies today, I'll be honest, I don't know. Here's the discussion, and I'm gonna suggest that we do this across the patches. Is look for folks like Bo, talk to me, let's get your information, and then we can work to connect inside. Where is the need? Where are those types of projects that we have going on, and see, is there an opportunity for the technologies that you're bringing to bear and the technologies that we need. Bo, you've got a mic in your hand. Anything to add?
No, I think it's, we're such a big company with different needs, and, what we know is what we think we need, and then sometimes what guys like you have is something we haven't thought about, but if we, spend a little time, well, that opens up a new kind of disruptive path that we hadn't thought about before. So it's really to have the conversation, and we go from there. That's our job down here in Austin.
I'm gonna jump back in, and it's not answering your question specifically, but this weekend I was digging a ditch, which is not a good thing to do in Austin at this time of year. But the guy that was helping me dig the ditch, he pulled out and he had Google Lens, and he's like, "What kind of tree is this?" And he pulled it out. So a lot of times we're not aware of technologies, and I don't know if you guys know Google Lens, but you snap a picture of something and it tells you where you bought your shoes, how much they are. Take a picture of just about anything, the leaf, what it is, and I immediately thought of 10 different applications in our products where I could use that technology. So sometimes we just have to see it, we have to hear it, and then immediately we're thinking of where the applications that we can apply in our systems.
I would just add that, like, this is what he's highlighting is a problem, right? Like, that entrepreneurs, the rapid problem solvers, don't necessarily know the needs or the requirements, right? They're not obvious, they're not visible, and so what you're saying is, like, sometimes we need those prompts, right, to spark the connection. And so what I would suggest, throw out there, is that these type of forums and places where we can come together, the startup community and big co's, to really understand each other, that's where the magic happens, right? Because all of a sudden it sparks an idea on both sides, and that's value from an investor standpoint. The way we see that is, like, look, there's a customer set out there. We know that they're interested in buying. Where else does that occur? Right, and so we can see if that's a fundable market, and then all of a sudden you have a functional innovation ecosystem.
Yeah. So if the folks that are BAE Systems in the room walk away without having talked to somebody tonight, then we failed in doing our job. If you're here as a startup and you haven't talked to us and you exchange business cards, then you're not doing your job. I agree. Make it purposeful tonight.
So make sure you talk to JD, because he's got the answers.
Hey, you going to jump on that, Kevin? Hey, one other thing that's the whole reason why Kevin and I got together was to try to give some context to what's going on. And actually, AFC is starting to reach out and engage to describe what the future environment, the new near-peer threat might be, what some of these new technologies could be, to give some context for you for these, away from the vehicle sensors and other things, so the startups and non-traditionals have a better idea of what's going on than just us old Army guys. But it is the ecosystem it's the responsibility. So come to us, come to AAL, come to AFC and say, this is what we want. And Capital Factory would be happy to put this on and have these dialogues. And I know Kevin will take the lead on that. But that's one.
All right, question over here.
What about mercenary innovation, paramilitary?
Yeah, not sure I understand the question. We're going to build mercenary robots? Because that sounds cool.
It's already happened, I think, correct?
That's classified.
Technology is moving super, super fast today. I know guys doing AI and AR, VR stuff where pretty much every 3 months they have to relearn everything they already knew. People from Google, Facebook, all these companies, the engineers are just all their eyes are bloodshot. They're working constantly to stay up with these technologies. How are we going to, at this pace, which is probably just going to keep increasing as well, it's probably not going to slow down, how are we going to get this technology into the field quickly when the cycle times definitely seem a little bit longer?
So let me frame that question, because I think this is actually a really good question. And in certain technology spaces, yeah, the innovation curves are like there's just no way to keep up. And there's definitely no way. How long's the Bradley Fighting Vehicle been in production and fielding? 40 years, right? What about the Paladin? You guys do the Paladin too, right? 50, wow, 50 years. So Chris is older than both of those systems. But in aviation space, I know they use a concept called MOSA, Modular Open Systems Architecture, and the idea is the BAE, as much as they love that life cycle maintenance part of that contract, you can't lock in upgrades and improvements. So how do, whoever can answer this question, do ground vehicle systems, and particularly what BAE is doing, allow for upgrades to be integrated at the speed of technology innovation in some of these spaces, like sensors and mesh networking and things that are going to really evolve rapidly?
I can say that in the ground combat vehicle arena, we have been given direction, and the current team has carried this on, is that there are certain obvious threshold requirements for current capability that are kind of no penetration lines. But the biggest characteristic and the most important characteristic in my view we're looking for in combat platforms going forward is the ability to upgrade. Does the architecture, the physical architecture, the power architecture, the data architecture, the cooling, does everything about the way the vehicle is put together support the ability to upgrade in tranches that are faster than our traditional 5-year block, upgrade type of cycle? And so that is a key component, and I think you'll find that articulated in the requirements documents for some of our current our systems that are out looking at now. There's another concept, and for those of you who haven't never logged on to it, the Mad Scientist blog is a pretty cool thing. But there's a concept called prototype wars, and our British colleague mentioned it today at the conference down at the Four Seasons. But the basic outline of that is that in the future, technology is going to turn so quickly that nation states are not going to be able to field major capital systems fast enough to keep up with the turn on the technology. And so the ones that are going to actually dominate in the future operating environment are those who are going to be able to take the reasoned calculated risk and go to war with a prototype, one that maybe hasn't been fully tested, one that maybe is seeing its first user evaluation under fire, and be able to bring that to bear quickly. And I think it's a fascinating concept. I would encourage you to read it.
I'd like to add to that also another technology that has to adapt and go that way is going to be the software and the software architecture too. So the F-35 right now looks the same as the F-35 will many years from now, but it'll be a completely different aircraft on the inside. So a lot of the upgrades like you're talking about will be software-based and firmware-based to be able to pretty much leave the components alone or have those designed in from the start to be upgradable, but it's going to be heavily on the software side to keep up with those technologies and to keep up with the threats to be able to do that. So that's becoming more and more a very key part.
We also still have some challenges in the funding environment, right? So the regionally, but especially central United States, the amount of risk capital available for rapid innovation is insufficient, and especially for big thinking, fast moving. So that's something that needs to be addressed as well to facilitate those things moving quicker.
All right, so we got time. Let's do one more question.
So a little combination of what you guys said is the risk capital. The problem is as startups, it's really hard to survive at a $50,000 SIPR. And so there's a link between what you're doing and what you're doing that is yet to be bridged. And so what would you say are the 2 or 3 things of trying to figure out how you take advantage of what's been created in the last year to try to figure out that one bridging that keeps a startup alive, that does a prototype nation faster, because you've got SOCOM and others that will do it, even have some Army that will do it, but trying to get through the bureaucracy and also the air cover required to kind of go make sure you get it fielded. Because there is capability. The problem is there's a lot of permafrost in each of the subcomponents, whether it be industry, the VC community, or even the government community. So, leave us with just some ideas about if we could do a year from now, what would you change slightly to maybe help move the ball forward?
That is a tough question. So, from the venture side, I think one of the things that we can do is a lot of community work, right? And that means I don't mean just working with a startup community, but working with the universities and industry to understand kind of the technology coming out of the universities, the technology that is potentially commercializable from universities, and their separate barriers and infrastructure to that are a problem. But also to really deeply understand the needs of industry, which serves us anyways, right? So as on the venture side, if we understand the needs of the customer, we can better target our investments, and then we can more rapidly sift through, because there are a ton of startups. We need to understand, do they have a broad enough customer set to survive? And so I think a big aspect of it is to get really active in the community. That said, I think there's also ways that venture can partner with industry. And you're starting to see that happen a little bit. So if you look at like what's going on with Houston Exponential Fund, that's industry investing through a venture vehicle to accelerate innovation and have early visibility to it. They're giving kind of their tranches of this is what we want to achieve. And so you're starting to see some of that happen, but it's happening too slowly right now. But what's happening in Capital Factory is a great example of where venture has a much easier interface to be able to understand what the military needs in terms of innovation. That's a big step forward as well. And you're seeing, at least the local guys be active in that. And I think that'll help, but that needs to happen on a much bigger scale.
I've been a part of several SBIRs and STTRs, and I'm very familiar with a lot of them that are going on and work with a lot of smaller to medium-sized companies. It's not too terribly hard to go SBIR phase 1 and phase 2, working with a university and a company. The really hard part that I see is the commercialization side, going to phase 3, where you have to, when you write these proposals from the first stage, you have to say there is a commercialization plan. But what I've seen so many times is you can combine a university and a small company, medium-sized company. The technology part will be great, but then how do you commercialize it? That's the missing piece. And I see so often that the companies try to figure that out on their own. There's somebody on staff who's an engineer or a technology person trying to do the marketing side and doing that. So the customers are there, but that's the gap that I see, is there's a need for somebody who is an expert in that and has expertise to be able to do that, to say, let's take the technology and get it in the hands of the customer. That commercialization piece, that's what I consistently see is missing. And I think the companies can't so much do that on their own. They're going to have to bring in somebody else that is the expert to team up with to get past that final hurdle. Because I've seen so many times that we'll get to phase 2 and then phase 3 never occurs to do that.
It's almost like we rehearsed the segue for what I was going to say. So to take it into a more traditional path, we have, I think, collectively, at least in the government side, for too long, thought that once you get something to TRL 6, Technology Readiness Level 6, which means it's demonstratable but not yet necessarily integrated, that was kind of the panacea right there. You were on the verge of success. But we have for too long, I think, misunderstood. With all due respect to General Cummings' crew up at PEO GCS, we have thought of our PMs, our product managers, and our program managers as being the customer, and they're not. The soldier's the customer. And so the key to bridge that valley of death, to get from a technology readiness level that you can demonstrate to one that is going to be actually adopted by a program or product manager and then integrated into a program of record is a demonstrated need and a champion from the user community who has a valid use case that says, yes, that's going to make a difference to soldiers in combat. It needs to be on a platform. It needs to be a program of record. That is how, that is the chalice right there of getting over the valley of death, is getting a user representative and a requirements champion to go to the PEO, to go to the PM, and say, we must have this. We have to get this in soldiers' hands.
What they said.
All right, well said, Scott. So great questions. Thank you. I'd like to also thank our panel tonight. Kevin, fantastic job. And Scott, John, Andy, and Adam. We'll be around here for a little bit longer if y'all have some questions, want to talk. We've got plenty of barbecue and plenty of drinks out there. Please don't make us drink it all ourselves. Our next event will be in the late September timeframe. So on behalf of BAE Systems, thank you for coming out here, and we look forward to seeing you around the neighborhood. Thanks.